Imagine this. You've spent your entire life believing in loyalty, in trust, in the sacred bond that makes a relationship more than just two people sharing a roof. You believe that at the end of the day, no matter how chaotic the world outside may be, what you have at home is genuine, solid, unshakable. You tell yourself that what you've built with your partner is real, a fortress where lies and deception cannot enter. And yet, one day, something shifts. It's subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably there. The air feels different, heavier, charged with something unspoken. You can't see it, but you can feel it, like a strange scent that lingers in a room even though you cannot find its source, or like a smile that once felt warm but now seems hollow, rehearsed, insincere. Because when someone betrays you, when someone crosses that invisible line, they always leave traces. They can try to hide them, bury them, mask them with fake affection or distracting gestures, but they remain. And if your intuition has been screaming at you that something is wrong, let me assure you of one thing. You are not crazy. You are not imagining shadows where there are none. The signs are there, but they're designed to slip past your awareness, to confuse you, to make you doubt yourself, to convince you that you're the problem. But you're not. That's why today, I'm going to open the curtain and reveal to you the 7 undeniable signs that a woman has just been intimate with someone else. Because no matter how much she denies it, no matter how many excuses she piles up, no matter how carefully she disguises it, her body, her habits, her attitude, her very environment will betray her. These signs are not theories or paranoia. They are the cracks in the wall of deception. And trust me when I say this, the last sign is so brutal, so undeniable, that it could change forever the way you look at your relationship, maybe even the way you look at yourself. My name is Celia, and my mission here is to open your eyes to what nobody else dares to tell you, to strip away the layers of comfortable lies and show you the raw, unsettling reality that so many prefer to ignore. Stay with me, because this knowledge isn't just information, it's protection. It could mean the difference between remaining blind, deceived, manipulated, or finally reclaiming your power, your dignity, your control. Ask yourself this. Have you ever felt that the person lying next to you, the one whose face you know so well, is no longer truly there? As if their eyes, once filled with connection, with recognition, now seem distant, vacant, belonging to someone else? As if behind every smile, every word, there is a fracture, a secret you cannot touch, something broken beyond repair? That sensation is not madness, it is not baseless jealousy. It is instinct. It is your subconscious screaming at you to open your eyes and stop pretending everything is fine. Because when someone has just betrayed you, when someone has given their body and intimacy to another, there is no way to completely conceal it. Their behavior changes. Their presence changes. The fabric of the relationship changes. And no matter how hard they try to mask it with overcompensation, with artificial affection, or even with cold indifference, the truth leaks through. This is the first point you must grasp if you want to uncover the deception. Sudden changes in attitude and emotional distance. Think about it. Has she stopped reaching out to you from one day to the next? Has she stopped showing genuine interest in how you're doing, in what's happening in your life? Or perhaps, even stranger, has she suddenly become excessively kind, too sweet, overly attentive, as if trying to smother her guilt with a manufactured version of affection? Both extremes, coldness on one hand, forced warmth on the other, point to the same underlying truth. It's an ancient strategy. Hide the storm by pretending perfection. Smile wider so no one notices the emptiness in your eyes. Act like nothing is wrong so you never suspect that something is deeply broken inside. But here's the reality. There is one thing she cannot fake, no matter how hard she tries: the absence of real connection. Because when the mind is, elsewhere. When the body has been shared with someone else, the bond that once existed between the two of you is shattered. And once it breaks, even if you try to ignore it, you will feel it in every interaction. Picture this. A man named Michael comes home after a long day at work. As always, the first thing he does is look for his wife. He greets her warmly, asks how her day has been. On the surface, everything appears normal. She answers, she smiles, she says the right words. But something is off. Michael hears a hollow echo in her voice, as if his greeting didn't land, as if his presence is now just background noise. Over time, he begins to notice that whenever he tries to get closer, whether physically or emotionally, she pulls away. The shared laughter they once had, the spontaneous conversations, the sense of being in sync, all of it evaporates. Their home becomes colder, their exchanges mechanical, as if they are strangers merely sharing the same roof. And the truth is, it didn't happen overnight. Michael had noticed the cracks before. Of course he did, but he ignored them, because acknowledging them would mean confronting the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he was no longer enough for her, and that thought was unbearable. So he lied to himself. He convinced himself it was in his head that he was being paranoid, and in that self-deception, he surrendered his power, step by step, until he no longer recognized the life he was living. The harsh truth is this: when someone becomes emotionally distant without reason, there is always a reason. And if you've felt that sudden chill, if you've sensed that the warmth you once shared has been replaced by an eerie politeness or an artificial enthusiasm, it's not random. It's because something inside her has shifted, something she cannot conceal no matter how she tries. You have two options. You can continue to ignore it, keep pretending that everything is fine, or you can open your eyes and face it head on. But remember, the longer you remain in denial, the deeper the wound becomes. Because betrayal does not simply infect the relationship, it eats away at your own sense of self. Now, when emotional distance begins, it rarely stands alone. It almost always triggers new patterns, suspicious habits, strange routines that don't quite make sense. Which brings us to the second crucial sign: unusual personal hygiene and sudden, unexplained habits. Think for a moment about how much of our lives are built on routines. Human beings are creatures of habit. We wake, we sleep, we eat, we go about our day in rhythms so familiar we barely notice them. But when someone betrays, when someone carries out an act of infidelity, those routines begin to collapse. Because betrayal is not only a physical act, it is a psychological burden, a weight of guilt that cannot be carried without leaving marks. Suddenly, the ordinary becomes suspicious. Showers taken at unusual times, clothes changed without reason, scents masked with new perfumes or body sprays. These are not coincidences. They are reflexes. Desperate, frantic attempts to cover tracks, erase evidence, wash away the guilt clinging to their skin. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "No man is free if he cannot control himself." And how perfectly this applies here, because the unfaithful partner becomes a prisoner of their own guilt, enslaved by the constant fear of being discovered. They may believe they're cleverly concealing their secret, but in reality, they are only enslaving themselves further, their actions betraying them more loudly than their words. Take, for instance, the obsession with exaggerated cleanliness. If you notice that your wife rushes to the bathroom to shower the moment she comes home, without any logical reason, you need to ask yourself why. If you suddenly see her carrying a spare change of clothes where she never used to, or you notice clothing disappearing without explanation, these are not trivial details. They are signals. They are the frantic gestures of someone trying to scrub away traces of something they cannot admit. Consider again Michael, but now older, in his 60s. He begins to notice something strange. His wife starts coming home late more often than usual. Always the same excuse. She was out chatting with a friend. He wants to believe her, but something about the pattern gnaws at him. One evening, he sees her rushing straight to the bathroom as if she needs to erase something from her skin, something that doesn't belong. That was the moment it all clicked. The way she cleansed herself wasn't routine. It was desperation. It was fear disguised as hygiene. And that's when Michael realized the truth he had been avoiding. Infidelity, after all, has a cruel way of corrupting even the simplest gestures, turning what was once natural into something frantic and strained. Because someone who is hiding something always acts with a trace of panic. And no matter how hard they try, they cannot manufacture peace where guilt is rotting them from within. You might try to dismiss these things, tell yourself you're imagining it, that everyone has the right to a little privacy. But deep down, you've felt that uneasiness you cannot explain, that heavy suspicion that burns in your chest. And while accepting the truth may hurt, continuing to deny it will destroy you slowly. Better to face a painful truth once than to endure the agony of a lifelong lie. So far, we've seen how emotional distance and strange hygiene habits can serve as early cracks in the facade. But they are just the beginning. Because betrayal doesn't end in the walls of your home. It spills into the way time itself is used and explained. And this brings us to the third sign, one of the clearest and yet one of the easiest to dismiss. Constant excuses for being away or coming home late. When emotional distance sets in and the subtle rituals of life begin to warp, the next sign emerges with almost mathematical certainty. The way time itself begins to be twisted, reshaped, and disguised. Think carefully about this. Routine is the skeleton of daily life. We all move through familiar cycles. The time we wake, the moments we return home, the calls we make, the rituals that give order to the chaos. And for the most part, those rhythms stay steady, changing only gradually across months or years. But when someone is hiding something, when they are weaving another life behind your back, those rhythms fracture. Suddenly, time becomes elastic. Absences multiply. Excuses become the daily currency of interaction. And what once seemed predictable becomes slippery, elusive, filled with contradictions that your intuition cannot ignore. This is why the third undeniable sign of betrayal is the emergence of constant excuses for being away or coming home late. It begins subtly, almost innocently. Maybe she mentions that she stayed a little longer at work or that a friend needed her at the last minute. Perhaps she claims that errands stretched out unexpectedly or that there was some spontaneous outing she couldn't avoid. At first, you dismiss it. After all, life can be unpredictable, and everyone deserves a degree of freedom. But then, it begins to happen more often. One excuse blends into another, piling up until they no longer sound like genuine explanations, but rehearsed lines in a poorly written play. And the strangest thing is how the tone changes. She may laugh nervously while saying it, or avoid eye contact, or provide details that feel oddly vague, as if she is improvising under pressure. Deep down, you know it doesn't add up. Deep down, you recognize that the rhythm of her life no longer resembles the woman you once knew. Let's picture David, a man in his early 60s. For most of his marriage, his wife's social circle was consistent, familiar, transparent. He knew her friends, her routines, her habits. But suddenly, new names began to appear. New outings cropped up. Dinners, drinks, gatherings with people he had never even heard of. At first, David thought it was a phase, maybe a late effort at expanding her social life. But as the weeks turned into months, these mysterious gatherings multiplied. Every Friday, every Saturday, sometimes even weekdays, she would vanish for hours with this group of friends. And when David asked to come along, her answer was always the same, a dismissive laugh followed by the words, "It's girl stuff. You wouldn't feel comfortable." On the surface, it sounded harmless, but David noticed the small cracks. The way she grew defensive whenever he asked for more details, the way her eyes flickered with unease when he casually inquired about who was there. These were not the habits of a woman casually spending time with friends. These were the reflexes of someone manufacturing alibis. Here lies the danger. Instead of facing the truth head-on, most men choose the path of least resistance. They tell themselves that it's normal, that their wives deserve freedom, that there's no harm in new friendships. They bury the knot in their stomach and silence the voice screaming that something is wrong. But by doing so, they walk blindly into the trap of self-deception, the very prison that betrayers rely on. Because the greatest accomplice of infidelity is not the person with whom the betrayal occurs. It is the denial of the betrayed. It is the man who closes his eyes to the obvious signs because facing them would mean shattering the life he thought he had. This is where strategy must replace impulse. If you truly want to uncover the truth, charging headfirst into confrontation will not work. It leads only to arguments, to denials, to clever evasions that muddy the water. Instead, you must practice what I call strategic observation. This is not about becoming paranoid, nor about obsessively policing every movement. It is about sharpening your perception, lifting the veil of illusion, and studying the patterns that unfold right in front of you. Because the truth is rarely hidden in grand gestures. It resides in the small, repeated inconsistencies that form a pattern too strong to ignore. Strategic observation begins with frequency. Pay attention to how often the absences occur. Is it truly a rare coincidence, or has it become a recurring habit? An occasional outing means nothing. But when lateness becomes a weekly ritual, when excuses multiply like weeds, you must begin to question the narrative. Next comes coherence. A truthful story is consistent, firm, natural. But a fabricated story crumbles under repetition. Ask yourself, does her explanation remain steady when mentioned days later, or does it shift, shrink, or expand depending on when you ask? Does she offer details with ease, or does she scramble to invent them on the spot? The third element is perhaps the most revealing of all: body language. Words can be rehearsed, but the body betrays. Watch closely the way she moves when explaining an absence, the nervous tapping of fingers, the avoidance of your gaze, the forced smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. These subtle gestures are often louder than the words themselves. Take, for instance, a simple dinner story. She tells you she went out to eat with a friend. Later, you casually ask what she ate. If she hesitates, if her answer is strangely vague or inconsistent, if her reaction is irritation rather than ease, it's because the dinner likely never happened. The details of a real experience come naturally. The details of a lie must be fabricated, and fabrication always leaves traces. This is the power of strategic observation, not to become her shadow, but to sharpen your own awareness so that you are no longer a passive participant in your own deception. At this point, many men fall into the trap of blaming themselves. They think, maybe I'm just insecure, maybe I'm overanalyzing. But let me tell you this, the worst betrayal you can commit is not her betrayal of you, but your betrayal of yourself. Because when your intuition screams and you silence it, when the truth stares you in the face and you close your eyes, you are complicit in your own destruction. Trust is not blind acceptance. Trust must be earned and it must be protected. And if someone who has pledged loyalty begins weaving webs of excuses, you owe it to yourself to face the facts. Now, before we continue, I want you to reflect on something. Has this message resonated with you? Have you ever felt manipulated by flimsy excuses that didn't make sense? By nervous laughter that failed to cover unease? If so, you are not alone. Men across the world experience this. Men who gave their loyalty only to be repaid with deception. That is why sharing your story matters. Speaking out is the first step toward reclaiming control, toward breaking the cycle of silence. When you share your truth, you not only free yourself, but you help others wake up to their own reality. But let us move forward, because time and excuses are only the surface. The deeper scars of betrayal reveal themselves in more intimate spaces, spaces where the mask is much harder to maintain. The fourth sign is perhaps the most brutal for a man to accept because it cuts directly into the most sacred bond between two people, their physical intimacy. When a woman has given herself to another man, her intimate behavior cannot remain untouched. It shifts, it fractures, it morphs into something alien, and no matter how much she tries to deny it, her body tells the truth. This is the arena where most men destroy themselves. They notice that their wife no longer seems interested in intimacy, that her desire has evaporated as though it was never there. Or conversely, they notice a sudden surge, a strange eagerness, as if she is overcompensating. And instead of seeing these changes for what they are, red flags, they blame themselves. They believe the problem lies in their appearance, in their masculinity, in their ability to satisfy. They fall into the devastating spiral of self-doubt, believing they must crawl for scraps of affection, beg for closeness, prove their worth over and over again. But here's the truth. When a woman betrays, her desire changes in ways she cannot disguise. On one hand, she may pull away entirely because her energy and attention are consumed elsewhere. Her guilt, her comparisons, her double life, these drain her, leaving nothing genuine for you. On the other hand, she may throw herself at you with unusual passion, desperately trying to maintain appearances, to cover her guilt with empty gestures. But either way, the authenticity is gone. Genuine desire cannot be faked, and when it is, the result is mechanical, hollow, painfully obvious. Let's return to David. After months of cold rejection, he suddenly noticed his wife seeking him out more frequently in bed. At first, he felt relieved. He thought they were repairing what was broken, that intimacy was returning. But soon he sensed something strange. The encounters felt rushed, automatic, as if she were performing a role rather than sharing a connection. What he mistook for reconciliation was, in reality, a desperate performance. When the truth came out, he realized the intimacy was not for him at all. It was an act of penance, a way for her to silence her guilt rather than rebuild their bond. That is the cruelty of this sign. It doesn't just wound your body, it wounds your very sense of worth. It convinces you that the problem is you, when the problem is the betrayal itself. This is why you must guard yourself against false guilt. Your value does not depend on her desire. Your worth is not defined by her approval. If she has chosen to betray, that decision belongs to her alone. And the alterations in her intimate behavior are not reflections of your failure, but symptoms of her choice. The moment you internalize false guilt, you become a prisoner in your own relationship, shackled not by her betrayal, but by your refusal to see it clearly. The path to freedom begins with clarity, with the recognition that intimacy poisoned by betrayal is no longer intimacy at all. It is theater, and you are the unwilling audience. And yet, as brutal as this realization may be, it is only one more layer of a larger pattern. Betrayal rarely confines itself to the heart or the body. It seeps into every corner of life, including the spaces we once considered private, even sacred. Which brings us to the next sign, a sign that has become increasingly undeniable in the modern world: sudden secrecy surrounding technological devices, the phone, the laptop, the digital world that stores every conversation, every message, every trace of life. This becomes a fortress, guarded more fiercely than ever before. Once, she may have left her phone on the table without concern, allowed it to ring without rushing to answer. But suddenly, everything changes. The phone is always within reach. The screen locks instantly. Notifications are silenced, and any attempt to glance at it, even accidentally, is met with irritation, defensiveness, even outright hostility. This transformation is not about privacy, it is about secrets, because the guilty know that their devices hold the very evidence that could unravel their lie. Once secrecy wraps itself around the digital world, once her devices become shields rather than tools, the circle of deception is nearly complete. You may begin to feel as though you are living beside a stranger, someone whose life you can no longer access, whose truths are locked behind passwords and defensive tones. But betrayal never exists in isolation. It radiates outward, touching every detail of existence. And no matter how carefully she constructs her web, there will always be one final set of signs, one last collection of cracks that expose the truth. These signs are not subtle, not debatable, not subject to interpretation. They are undeniable. And once you recognize them, there is no going back. They become the final confirmation that what you suspected was not a paranoid fantasy, but reality itself. And with this realization comes the most difficult choice of all: what to do once the truth can no longer be ignored. One of the most striking signs lies in her physical energy and appearance. Infidelity is not only an emotional act, it is physical. It is exhausting. It consumes vitality. Suddenly, she may carry herself differently, perhaps with a new glow, a sudden surge of energy that doesn't match the rhythm of her shared life with you. Or conversely, she may seem drained, distracted, depleted from giving her time and body elsewhere. Notice the subtle alterations: new clothes that were never part of her wardrobe before, a different style of makeup, an unusual fragrance. Each of these changes is presented as self-care, as harmless reinvention. But in reality, they are signals of a hidden audience, changes made not for you, but for someone else. When a woman rediscovers her appearance with such sudden intensity, ask yourself the crucial question: who is she trying to impress? Because if that effort is not mirrored within your shared intimacy, it is likely being invested outside of it. Equally revealing is the silence that falls over shared conversations, where once she might have shared stories of her day, updates about her work, or small anecdotes about friends, suddenly the narrative dries up. You ask how her day was, and she offers only the bare minimum. Fine. Okay. Nothing special. But life is never that empty. These silences are not the absence of events, they are the deliberate withholding of them. Secrets create walls, and those walls manifest in quiet responses, in vague answers, in the refusal to open doors that were once freely accessible. The silence speaks louder than words ever could. It is the sound of a life being lived elsewhere, of experiences being curated for someone else, while you are left with only scraps. And then there is the most brutal sign of all, the one that cannot be denied, cannot be disguised, cannot be explained away. It is the discovery of concrete evidence. Perhaps it arrives by accident, a stray text message left visible on the screen before she locks her phone in a panic, a receipt for a dinner at a place she never told you she went, an unfamiliar item of clothing forgotten in a bag. Perhaps it comes through a sudden slip of the tongue, a detail that doesn't match her earlier story, a name spoken with too much familiarity. Evidence has a way of surfacing because no lie can be sustained forever. The longer deception is carried out, the heavier it becomes, until eventually a piece of the puzzle falls into your hands. And when it does, everything else you observed, the excuses, the secrecy, the distance, crystallizes into a single, unbearable truth. You were right all along. It is here, in this moment of undeniable clarity, that the greatest danger arises. Not the betrayal itself, but the temptation to minimize it, to rationalize it, to pretend that the evidence is not what it appears to be. Many men, when confronted with undeniable proof, still choose blindness. They tell themselves it was a one-time mistake, that it doesn't mean what it clearly means, that forgiveness without accountability will somehow heal the wound. But let me tell you the harsh reality. Denial of the truth does not save a relationship. It only condemns you to live inside a prison of humiliation, where every glance, every word, every touch is poisoned by the knowledge of what has been lost. To know and yet refuse to act is to betray yourself more deeply than she ever betrayed you. Because loyalty to another means nothing if it requires treachery against your own dignity. And so the question becomes not is it happening, but what will you do now that you know? Will you continue to live in the shadow of lies, or will you reclaim the light of your own truth? Will you allow yourself to be diminished, to be twisted into silence, or will you rise and declare that your worth is not negotiable? These are not easy questions. They cut to the very core of what it means to love, to trust, to build a life with another. But the answers define whether you remain a prisoner of deception or step into freedom, however painful that freedom may be. Understand this. Betrayal does not mean the end of your value. It does not diminish your strength, your masculinity, your worth as a man. It is not a reflection of what you lacked, but of what she chose. And her choice says nothing about your essence. It speaks only of her disloyalty. If you internalize it as your failure, you grant her betrayal power over your very soul. But if you recognize it as her weakness, her inability to honor what was sacred, then you free yourself from the chains of false guilt. Betrayal may wound you, but it does not define you. What defines you is your response, whether you stand tall in the face of lies or shrink into silence. As we close this journey, let me remind you why these signs matter. They are not simply a list of suspicions. They are lifelines. They are tools to pierce through the fog of manipulation, to prevent you from wasting years of your life in the service of a lie. They are reminders that your intuition is not madness, that your unease is not paranoia, that your pain is not baseless. They are the proof that you deserve truth, respect, and loyalty, and that settling for less is not love but surrender. And most importantly, they are a call to action. To see clearly is only the first step. To act with clarity is the true liberation. So if you have recognized these signs in your own life, do not turn away. Do not bury them beneath excuses or smother them with false hope. Confront them. Speak them aloud. Make the choice that honors your dignity rather than diminishes it. Because while betrayal may have broken the bond, it cannot break you unless you allow it to. The path forward will not be easy, but it will be yours, free of lies, free of manipulation, free of the shadows that have haunted your nights. And in that freedom lies the possibility of something greater, the rediscovery of yourself, the rebuilding of your strength, the power to create a life not defined by betrayal, but by truth.